Good morning. If you have your Bible with you, turn over to Psalm 46. Psalm 46. We'll pick up in verse 1 in just a moment. But as you turn there to Psalm 46, I want to say just a few quick things as we begin. Back in January, when I first found out that I would be coming here to this church and to be able to work here as an evangelist and to be a part of this preacher training program, I had no idea that it would look like this. And I don't think Lawrence or the elders or anybody else had any idea that it would look quite like this. And the question that I've received from a few people throughout this past week is, it must be pretty strange to come here and to start up a preacher training program in a time like this, in the middle of everything that's going on. And in some ways that's true. It is very strange. The masks and the social distancing, definitely didn't see that coming. But I want you to know that it has not taken anything away at all from the joy and excitement and gratitude and honor that I feel to be a part of this group. Lawrence has been somebody that I've looked up to since I was little, when he came to Southside and would be a part of the annual lectures that they had there at my home congregation. So I've looked up to Lawrence for many years, and I feel like even in just this 1 week, I've already learned so much from he and from Ben and from others. And I know that by the time that this experience ends, I will have learned something from every one of you. If nothing else, just your example in seeing you here and seeing how much this means to you. And so I want to say thank you. Before we jump in, I wanted to find some way to express my gratitude and thankfulness to be here and to be a part of this group. Thankful to the elders for this opportunity. But just overall, I'm thankful to be a part of this family, to be a part of this group of believers and this incredible family of God here at Lost River. And I feel like there's so much more that I could say and wish that I had the time to say, and maybe that'll come down the road. But I look forward to shaking your hands when all this is over and being able to connect with so many of you. I feel like I've already felt somewhat at home as I've gotten to meet a lot of you already, and I look forward to more of that in the months and the next couple years. Also, I didn't realize the first service ended, and I realized afterwards that I had my mic on during the invitation song. So hopefully I can remember to turn that off. Maybe that'll be part of the training program. So I'll try to remember to do that so I don't have a solo. But Psalm 46, beginning in verse 1. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. The nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, and the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Come, behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolations on the earth. He makes wars to cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow, he shatters the spear, he burns the chariots with fire. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. One of the things that I've had to deal with growing up in Southeast Texas is hurricane season. And if you paid any attention to the news right now, you know that there are 2 storms brewing out in the Gulf. So I'll be in touch with my family in the next several days, seeing how that's going. But back in 2005, there was a very serious storm that came through. It was Hurricane Rita. And it started out as, I think, a Category 5. By the time it made landfall, it was a Category 3. But as this storm approached, we knew that it was coming, and we had prepared for it somewhat. By the time that we actually evacuated, it took us 27 hours to travel from Deer Park, Texas, my hometown, over to Sam Rayburn, where my grandparents' lake house was. And so normally that's about a 3-hour trip, but it turned into this 27-hour-long expedition. And to make things worse, we were almost there, probably within a couple hours, and we got the news on the radio that the storm had actually turned and was now headed straight for Lake Rayburn. And so here we all are packed into this log cabin right next to a lake, the best spot you could be for a major hurricane. But we huddle inside, and I remember as we waited for that storm to pass over, I could hear the howling of that wind as it beat the side of the cabin. I remember the crack of the pine trees as they fell to the ground. And I remember looking outside and seeing the red tin roof of the garage shake up and down like it was about to be ripped away by this wind. And the whole scene, I guess, sort of reminds me of maybe what the psalmist must have felt when he describes the earth giving way and the mountains being moved and this terrifying scene that he sets up there at the beginning. And maybe you've been through something like that. You've been through some kind of storm in your life. But I remember in that moment, as I was watching all this happen and hearing the sounds that were associated with that, I remember not feeling afraid or worried. And maybe that's because I was only 7 or 8 years old. I probably didn't think much of it. I probably just viewed it as a good time to get away from school and be with my cousins. But I think the main reason why I was able to feel that assurance and security is because I could look to my parents and I could hear them reassure me with almost the same words from this psalm to be still. That it's going to be all right, it's going to be okay, just be still. And really, those are two words that we all need to hear in life. We go through different phases and in different situations. We go through our own storms, and we need somebody there to reassure us with those words that it's going to be okay. Just be still. I realize there may be several college students who are just moving away from home and they're in a new place for the first time. And so that's a situation. There's a lot of uncertainty, and you're making life decisions, and you need somebody to come alongside you and say, hey, it's going to be all right. Just be still. Or you think about somebody who maybe you're struggling with some sin and you've been fighting against it for so long and you've been doing your best and you've continually put your trust in the Lord, and you need somebody to come and reassure you with those words. Just be still. It's going to be okay. Or we have a major pandemic on our hands, right? Maybe you hear a report from the doctor or the report about some loved one, and you're overwhelmed by the weight of this worry, and you need somebody to say, it's going to be okay, just be still. And you think about those words, if a stranger came up and said that to you, that wouldn't really mean a whole lot, right? If some stranger ran up to you and said, hey, be still, you'd start looking around, wondering what's about to happen. But when someone that you love and you care about, a parent or someone that you respect, when they come up and they say those words to you, it means a whole lot more. And that's exactly what we have in this psalm. Verse 10, you notice, is in quotations. And so this isn't just the words of the psalmist. These are the words of God himself. And so it's like in this psalm, God, he's grabbing his people by the hand. He's grabbing his children by the hand and saying, no matter what happens in life, I've got you. Just be still. But then notice the second part of that phrase. There in verse 10, he says, be still and know that I am God. Be still and know that I am God. And what that says, I think, is that God has revealed himself. He's made himself known. And it's through that knowledge, knowing who God is and what he's done for us and what he will do for us, that we can have that peace and assurance through life. That if we know who he is, we can have that stillness no matter what comes our way. And so this morning, I want to take that phrase, be still and know, and think about what is it in this psalm that we need to know about God in order to have that peace and security this morning, to have that stillness throughout our lives. And I think that comes across a few different ways in the psalm. Be still and know, first of all, that our God will not be moved. Our God will not be moved. You notice right at the beginning of this psalm, we have a very vivid picture of what's going on. And it's hard to imagine any scene more terrifying than the mountains giving way, the earth slipping into the heart of the sea, the waters roaring and foaming with rage. And so here's this terrifying picture that's set up at the beginning of disaster and disarray. But then notice how the scene changes in the next stanza. There in verses 4 and 5, he pictures the holy habitation, the beautiful city of God, with God himself in the midst of her, in that peaceful river flowing through it. And so in contrast to the chaos and calamity that's going all around him, God is in the midst, and he is immovable. And so you see that scene change, but then look also at verse 8. It says, "Come, behold the works of the Lord." Behold the works of the Lord. And I love that word, behold. Don't just glance at it. Don't just keep it in the back of your mind, but focus on it, dwell on it. Think always, keep that ever before you. And so the psalmist is showing us that whatever is going on in the world, God will not be moved. He's exalted and on his throne, in control of it all, unfazed by what's going on around. He will not be moved. And think about the security that gives us in life. Because how many times do we go through different phases in life where we feel like it's just completely out of our control? I remember the first time that I went out to the Atlantic Ocean. It was with the FC cross country team, and we got this bright idea to go try to stand against one of the waves that were rolling in. I'm from, down in Southeast Texas. The closest thing to that we have is Galveston Bay, and it's pretty much just stagnant water hitting the sand. But we get this bright idea. We duck under the smaller waves to get out to these bigger ones. And as we stand there, I remember feeling the water being pulled from behind me as this wave started to form. And as this wall of water crashed down over us, I have never felt more out of control in my life. I didn't know which way was up. I was just completely tossed and turned by this wave. And then you start thinking in the back of your mind, you hear about like undercurrents and stuff. So you're wondering, if you're going to come up. But I remember after that all subsided and we were back safe on the shore, thinking that that's about how life feels sometimes. Like just one wave can come and topple us over. But is that how God is? Shaken by the winds and the waves? This psalm is showing us that God is immovable. He won't be shaken by anything that's going on in the world around us. And that idea is all throughout Scripture. Isaiah 40 and verse 28, "Have you not known, have you not heard? The Lord is an everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He doesn't faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable." Or Jeremiah 10 and verse 12, "It is God who made the earth by his power, who established the world by his wisdom, and by his understanding he stretched out the heavens." Or I love what Moses says to the people of Israel back in Exodus 14. There, you remember, through the 10 plagues, God had displayed his power over Pharaoh, his power over the gods of Egypt, and his power over all of nature. And so Pharaoh, he finally decides to let the people go. And so they make their way out of Egypt and toward the Red Sea, but then Pharaoh changes his mind and pursues them. And so here are the people of God. From behind is the enemy pressing in hard, and before them are the waves of that Red Sea rolling up ahead. And it looks like there's no hope. It looks like all hope is lost in this moment, like there's no escape. But then right before that Red Sea parts, Moses says to the people, "Do not fear. Stand and see the salvation of the Lord. The Lord will fight for you while you keep silent." The Lord will fight for you while you keep silent. It's like the family who was taking a long road trip one night, and it was through the fog and through some winding roads, and so it was a little bit of a scary drive, and their little 3-year-old girl nervously started asking all these questions. Where are we going? How long is it going to take? Are there any restaurants along the way? Are we going to be okay? Is it going to be safe? And on she asked some of these questions. But after a little bit, she was completely silent. And so mom and dad, they thought that maybe she'd fallen asleep, and so they looked back over their shoulder to find she's just smiling out the window. And so the mother asked, well, did you run out of questions? And the little girl said, no. And she said, well, why are you so silent now? And the little girl said, because Daddy's driving. Daddy's driving. Do you have that kind of assurance this morning? That no matter where life's road takes you, no matter how dark or foggy this road might get, that your Father is in control at all times, in all places, and in all situations? That He's unfazed by the calamity that might be going on around us, that He's in control of our destiny. Our God is immovable. And if we have that assurance, then we don't have to be anxious or worried about anything in life if we will just hold to His powerful, unchanging hand. Our God will not be moved. But the second thing in this psalm is to be still and know that our God is with us. Our God is with us. Did you notice how near God is throughout this psalm? He's described as our refuge and strength and fortress. So that's the idea that He's the place that we run to for peace and protection. But then notice also how the whole psalm is centered around this idea. Verse 11, the Lord of hosts is with us. Verse 7, right in the middle of this psalm, the Lord of hosts is with us. And then all the way back to verse 1, the psalm begins with those words, God is our refuge and our strength, a very present help in times of trouble. And so it's not just that God is exalted and on His throne, inaccessible to us, but He's right there with us, beside us, encouraging us every step of the way. He's that very present help, especially in times of trouble. And think about how comforting that is for us. Because we've all been through different times where we feel like we're all alone. I remember when I was little, one Sunday, my family left me behind at services. I'd fallen asleep during the sermon, and I was only probably 5 or 6 at the time, so it was okay. But I'd fallen asleep, and I woke up to this big, dark, empty church building wondering what in the world happened, where did my parents go? And I guess if you're going to be left behind anywhere, the church building is a pretty safe spot. You're going to be okay there. But really, no matter where it is in life, being alone is scary. And that's not something that we grow out of. People might be a little more introverted. They might like to keep to themselves a little bit more, but nobody likes to be completely alone. In fact, that's one of the worst forms of punishment that we have, right? Solitary confinement. And sometimes that's how life feels. Like we're all alone, like there's nobody there to help us and to keep us going. But what this psalm tells us is that we never have to feel that way. God is a very present help. And you see that idea again in Psalm 23. There, David, he says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why? For you are with me. Or Isaiah 41 in verse 10, God Himself says, fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you, I will help you, I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. And that idea is not only found throughout the Old Testament, but that was made real in the life of Jesus. John 1, He's the Word that became flesh and dwelt among us. Hebrews 2 in verse 17, in all things He had to be made like His brethren, that He might become a merciful and faithful high priest. Or Philippians 2 in verse 6, though Jesus was in the form of God, He did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped, but He emptied Himself by taking on the form of a servant and being born in the likeness of men. And being found in human form, He humbled Himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. God is not just on His throne. He came down from that throne to be with us. And He's with us always. throughout junior high and high school, I had a leather Bible case that had a story engraved on the front of it. And it was about a man who was looking back at his life, and he noticed two sets of footprints in the sand, one for his and one for the Lord's. And as he looked back at his life, he noticed that there were certain times where one set of footprints disappeared. And he noticed that it was the times where he struggled the most, the times where he felt like he was the most in need, where he was struggling in going through hard times. And so he turned to God and he said, God, I thought that you promised to be with me. I thought that you said you'd be with me every step of the way. Where were you in the times that I needed you most? Don't you care? And God said to him, those moments where you see only one set of footprints are the moments when I picked you up and I carried you all the way. That's what God promises to us through this psalm, that he will never leave us or forsake us. Even in the times where we feel like we're all alone, he is there carrying us all the way. It's in his very name, Emmanuel, God with us. But the last thing in this psalm is to be still and know that our God will rescue his people. Our God will rescue his people. Look back at verse 5. Verse 5 says, God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. That phrase at the end there, as I was looking through this psalm, kind of puzzled me at first. Because I think, why wait till the morning? It seems like the city is in distress right now. And so why wait till the morning? Why not help her now? Why not rescue her now? And that's the question that a lot of us ask, right? When we go through hard times, we start to wonder, why is God not rescuing me in this moment? But I think the point is not so much about when or how quickly this will happen, but the certainty of it. That just as sure as night eventually falls and morning dawns, God will arise and rescue his people. We won't turn there now, but many believe this psalm is actually written as a reflection back on 2 Kings chapter 19, when God delivered Hezekiah and the people of Judah from Assyria. And imagine what that scene would have been like. Imagine that you're one of the people inside that city, and you've heard about this Assyrian army, how they've swept through all the other nations in violence and brutality, and now here they are at the doorsteps of your city. And you've heard that your king Hezekiah has no plans to surrender. And so here you are huddled with your family, trying to reassure one another with those same words, right? It's going to be all right, just be still, it'll be okay. And it is just the longest sleepless night, praying that God will somehow deliver you. And you wake up the next morning to hear these words. 2 Kings 19:35, that night the angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 of the Assyrians. And when the people arose early in the morning, behold, all these were dead. It's just like Psalm 46. That God makes wars to cease. He breaks the bow, he shatters the spear, he burns the chariots with fire. And all of that is to say that no matter how long or dark the night might be, salvation will come just as sure as the rising of that sun. God will arise and rescue his people. And that's the same assurance that we have today. And think about that. Isn't that what you and I need most in life? For someone to rescue us? Many years back when my dad was much younger, he was out hunting one time, and he somehow got into some quicksand. And with quicksand, of course, you know that the more you struggle and you try to free yourself, the deeper and deeper you sink. And there's been a lot of times in my life where I've felt that way. That no matter how hard I struggle, no matter how hard I work to try to free myself from the burdens of life, the deeper and deeper I sink. And if we're honest with ourselves, we've all been in that moment. It doesn't matter if you're a believer or unbeliever, everybody, if they're honest with themselves, they felt that way. They realize that they just can't save themselves. And the only way out of that, the only way out of the burdens of life that drag us under is if somebody does for you what they did for my dad. Somebody has to throw you a rope and pull you out and rescue you. And that's what God promises in this psalm. He promises to rescue his people. And we can be certain of it. And I don't think there's any greater picture of that than in the book of Revelation. There, John, the author, he writes to these people to strengthen and encourage them as they're about to undergo this great tribulation. A tribulation in which some of them would become martyrs for the faith. And so what he does is he paints this incredible scene of God's deliverance. And as we think about this scene, see if there are any parallels between what we've been talking about in Psalm 46. There in Revelation 19, there are these two armies lining for battle. On one side, you have Satan and his army as they gather to make war against God and his people, just as they have throughout all history. And at times throughout this book, the enemy would seem overwhelming. But in this final showdown, it's not even a contest. The battle is over before it even begins. You can look in chapter 19, but there's not even a battle. Satan and death are thrown into the lake of fire, and it's just like Paul said in 1 Corinthians 15 that death is swallowed up in victory. The new Jerusalem descends from heaven as a bride, and the saints are united with Christ. And that holy habitation, the city of God, with that river flowing through it. And then those words from Revelation 21 in verse 3, behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death will be no more, and there'll be no more mourning or crying or pain, for these things have passed away. And then chapter 22 and verse 5, there'll be no more night there, for the Lord will be their light. John writes all of that to say that no matter how bad things might get, no matter how great this tribulation might be, you can be sure that God will ultimately rescue his people. It might not be today, it might not be in the way that you envision, it might not be in this life. But it's like John is saying, if you can just remember this image, if you can just close your eyes and picture this scene of deliverance in the holy habitation with God in the midst of his people, then you can make it through anything in this life. Even though the earth gives way and the mountains move to the heart of the sea and the waters roar and foam and rage, we can be still and know that one day salvation will dawn on the people of God for eternity. Our God will not be moved. Our God will be with us. And one day our God will rescue his people. One more thought this morning as we close. When I think back to that series of events with Hurricane Rita back in 2005, my mind always goes over to Mark chapter 4, where Jesus and his disciples are out on the Sea of Galilee. And there, you remember, it was around nightfall, and so they gather into this boat, and they start to make their way across the sea in the dark. And as they make their way across, a great storm arises. And the wind begins to beat the side of that boat, and it begins to be swamped by the waves, and it even begins to sink. And so here's this terrifying storm that's raging over the sea, and the disciples are afraid and terrified, I imagine, gripping the sides of the boat. And where's Jesus? Well, he's asleep on the cushion. He will not be moved. And so the disciples, they look around at what's going on and they cry out frantically, Lord, don't you care? Don't you care? And imagine how those words would have hit Jesus. Of course I care. I came down from my throne in heaven to be with you, and I'm with you now in this boat, and I'll always be with you. I took on the form of man and became like you in every way, and I'm humbling myself to the point of death on a cross just to show you how much I care. But the disciples, they cry out, Lord, don't you care? Save us, deliver us, for we're perishing. And with that storm raging on the sea, in the midst of that night, the Son of God arises to rescue his people with just those 3 words, peace, be still. And immediately there was a great calm. Those 2 words there, be still, literally means to make speechless. Nature was speechless in the presence of Jesus. And if all creation can be calmed by the words of its creator, then how much more can you and I be still in the presence of the one who spoke all things into being and who reminds us by his word even today, be still and know that I am God. It may be today that you're in need of that assurance and peace and security. It may be that you're not a child of God. You haven't put Christ on in baptism and you're not a part of that family. And we encourage you to reach out to us so that you can become a child of God and you can have that security in this life as you look forward to that holy habitation one day. Or it may be that you are a child of God, but you've been toppled by the winds and the waves of life, and you're struggling to get up, and you need the hands of these people to bring you back and to reconnect you with that unchanging hand of God. Whatever your need might be this morning, make that known now as together we stand and sing.